It's 1991. The Soviet Union collapses after almost 70 years of existence. The United States and their coalition forces are at war with Iraq. The Iceman Ötzi is found in the Alps. A perfectly preserved mummy of a man who lived more than 5,000 years ago.
An die 5300 Jahre hatte im ewigen Eis verbracht.
He was most probably murdered. They found an arrowhead in his left shoulder. Back to 1991. A young woman called Angela Merkel was appointed Minister for Women and Youth.
Ja, das wird sich herausstellen, ob es von der Kompetenz passt oder nicht. Also ich meine...
Das hat gepasst. Bryan Adams is on top of the Billboard charts. With Everything I Do It For You. Wow, still catchy. And Perdix Perdix is voted Bird of the Year. What a proud little bird. And still today, 29 years later, we all have to agree it was the right choice. But what happened in the automotive industry, and which cars of that year deserve the same amount of respect as that little bird and are about to become future classics? Let's go right back and find out. Welcome to Car Crush. The global automotive industry in 1991 is very much under pressure and is facing various challenges worldwide. The US are just coming out of a recession with heavy impact on their automakers, sales going down by 13% compared to 1990. GM alone is cutting 70,000 jobs and is closing 21 plants. What we see is really the decline of the North American auto industry after being number one in the world just 6 years earlier. But it's certainly not only due to the economic crisis, it's also a chronic lack of competitiveness and products not meeting customer demands. Growing pressure comes especially from the Japanese car companies with more modern vehicles and cost-efficient production. In Europe, there's radical changes throughout the continent. After decades of being cut off from world markets, the economies of Central and Eastern Europe have to be put back on their feet and a new order established for the entire continent. The Western European countries are struggling with high wages and poor cost competitiveness. At the same time, we're seeing a broad discussion about climate change and the impact of cars on the environment. There are calls for significant CO2 reductions, and the motto of the Frankfurt Motor Show is mobility and responsibility. And we're seeing plenty of environmentally friendly concept cars from almost every automaker. Seems like we've been here before. There's an electric BMW E1, a hybrid Volkswagen Chico, an electric Mercedes 190, Ford Escort, Opel Astra, Fiat Panda, Peugeot 205, Renault Clio, and so on. It's just crazy to see all these electric and hybrid concept cars at the beginning of the 90s, and most of them might just be quickly reconfigured combustion cars. But nevertheless, just imagine where we could have been if these early efforts would have been continued. What else? Volkswagen takes over Skoda. Simply clever. The last Trabant is built after more than 3.7 million units, and the Renault Clio is the car of the year. My sister actually had one of these and I liked it very much. But now let's have a closer look at some of the most exciting introductions of the year to track down the future classics. From Ford, we're seeing the 5th generation Escort in a very sporty version, the RS2000. And given its big name and the heritage of the Mark I and II, this could have been something quite exciting. But with the dull styling of the 1990 base model and rust killing them all off, not really. Next is the BMW 3 Series Coupe. The E36 generation was a giant leap coming from the predecessor E30, and somehow laid the foundation for all the modern era BMWs. Of course, it has a bit of a dubious reputation for being heavily abused by the car tuning scene. If you search YouTube for E36, you'll see what I mean. Here's one example. This is probably one of the worst treated cars out there, and falling prices over the years didn't make things better. Nevertheless, The original version, as it left the factory in Bavaria, is a beautiful, sleek, dynamic coupe which incorporates everything BMW is famous for. It was a time when BMWs had a sharp character and were clearly distinguishable from their number one rival Mercedes. Here the sporty, agile, raw driver's car, and on the other side the much more luxurious, comfortable, refined opponent. It was easy and it made sense for everybody. Sometimes I miss these days. This E36 Coupe is a fantastic car and a future classic. Next is another BMW, the E34 5 Series Touring, first unveiled at the Frankfurt Motor Show. Well, that's a nice package, great design, decent quality, low prices and maintenance cost. A reasonable daily driver with lots of space and style. But probably a bit too ordinary and functional for a future classic. Let's move on. The Mercedes-Benz S-Klasse. It's always an important year for Mercedes when a new S-Klasse comes on stage. This year again, by the way, so watch out. In 1991, it was the mighty W140. Presented at Geneva in March, this was one of the most controversial cars, heavily criticized when it came out, especially in Germany. Too big, too heavy, too ignorant. And it was. But then it had this ultimate luxury car appeal like maybe a handful of other models in history. Immediately impressive, full of strength and character, avoiding any special effects, just relying on its sheer size and proportions. You just can't deny it. This is the natural-born boss car. And that without being aggressive or overly sporty in any way. Of course, the BMW 7 Series of that time was a beautiful car, fantastic, still looking good today, much more sleek and dynamic than the S-Klasse. But if it's about presence and status and prestige, I mean, look at it. And that character grew very much over time and got stronger every year. Today, I'm not even sure if I agree with Bruno Sacco, who said that the greenhouse should have been 4 inches lower. It certainly would have been more pleasing at first sight, but at the same time might have lost a big chunk of its majesty. So, Mr. Sacco, congratulations to the powerful and timeless design. I'm very sure a car of these dimensions would have been a nightmare from virtually any other car company. But somehow you turned it a masterpiece. This W140 is a future classic. And if I were to make a video about all the S-Klasse generations, I'm sure the W140 would probably be right up there at the top. Well, with the 222. And maybe the 221. Oh yeah, and of course the 126. And don't forget the 111. Well, it's maybe a bit more complicated, so let's move on. The Audi 100 Avant. Wow, that's back down to earth. Obviously, it's a big step forward from the previous generation C3, which in my opinion was one of the worst looking cars ever made, with its bland, technical, clinical design. The C4 is certainly in a different spot and shows where Audi is heading to with its Avant models. It still looks good, quite fresh and modern today, but at the same time, to me, it doesn't have any young-timer charm, nothing that makes you immediately search the web for a used one. It's not even quirky or weird. It's just, well, an Audi from the 90s. So, next. The Mazda MX-3. Presented at the Geneva Motor Show and based on the compact 323, it was positioned as an affordable sports car and even made a short appearance in the movie Dumb and Dumber. And looking at its styling, I think this might have been quite a good match. I don't see any signs for a future classic here. Sorry, Mazda, but keep going. We all know there's much more exciting cars from you in the years to come. Next in line is the Porsche 968. It was introduced as the successor of the 944 and is basically just a major facelift of that model. Visually, it came much closer to classic Porsche design language, as we all know it from the 911 generations. The front end clearly anticipates styling cues from the later 993, arguably one of the most desirable 911s of all times. And there's more good news from a production point of view. This 968 is being built in Zuffenhausen and not at Audi in Neckarsulm like the 924 and the 944. Overall volumes were below 13,000 units, which is less than a fifth of the 911 production of the same era. That makes it a rare Porsche, which can't be a bad thing. Of course, enthusiasts always struggle with it being front-engined, 4-cylinder, water-cooled, transaxle and so on. But in my opinion, the 968 was the most beautiful of the non-911 Porsches. Overall, it's quite an adorable 2+2 Gran Turismo, which costs a fraction of a 911 from the same year and is spacious and comfortable enough to use it every day. Production was terminated after only 4 years in 1995. There weren't enough customers picking this over the sensational 993. But as a youngtimer, this makes it even more rare and attractive. This 968 is a future classic. And here's our final contender for the year 1991. You've probably all been waiting for it, the Mercedes E-Class Convertible A124. Of course, it has a place in this list, and it's quite a no-brainer. You read about it in almost every article with the word youngtimer in its headline. The A124 certainly is a desirable car, with classic Mercedes genes, 2 doors and a retractable roof. A combination which has always been a safe bid for a future classic and rising prices. And this open-top E-Class makes no exception. It offers so many reasons: timeless Mercedes design, excellent build quality, reasonable cost. No doubt, this car is a winner. Personally, I'm always slightly underwhelmed when seeing a 124 convertible, and I think it could need a pinch more excitement and specialness over the 124 sedan. For me, it's just a few notches too calm, too well behaved. But if you're looking for a long-term relationship, that's maybe not even a bad thing. And as a facelift model with the right color combination, it's certainly a gorgeous vehicle. This E-Class convertible definitely is a future classic. So that was about it for the year 1991. Next week we're going to talk about Bill Clinton, bats and vipers. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.